All right, everyone, thank you again for joining the webinar. If all of my webinar presenters could go ahead and turn on their cameras and mics, I will go ahead and turn this webinar over to Lee Touchfarber.
Thank you, Aaron. All right. Hi, Ami. Hi, Mimi. Mimi, you there? Okay, so to introduce the session, first of all, I'm the CEO of Renew Senior Communities. We have a location in Glenwood Springs. It's an assisted living and memory care location, and we also have a memory care community in Aurora. This talk series is in partnership with a extraordinarily top shelf organization, the Aspen Times. And they are truly out of the box thinkers, and they generate really, really good news and editorial content. And so they're great to be partners with here. A little bit about Renew. In terms of our DNA, we're really interested in social impact. And so in addition to creating extraordinary environments for seniors and taking a non-traditional approach to how we handcraft the senior housing offering, we've also developed this overlay, which is a Renew Talk Series platform. And historically, we've done these on and off our campus in different spaces and filled a room. Now that we're in a different environment, we're taking this to the digital sphere. So we have curated a stellar roster of credentialed and distinguished experts in diverse areas of health. And we're providing them with a platform to spread their ideas. And the aim is to provide insights about important issues and inspire and catalyze action that can help to push these ideas forward. So in this first talk, the format is going to be about 60 minutes of just a synergistic sort of Q&A/conversation with these presenters. And then we'll go to a 30-minute audience Q&A. And in the right-hand column, in the right-hand margin of your screen, you can click on a hand icon. And once you click on that, it allows you to type in a question or a comment, and we will take those and we will try to incorporate them on the tail end of this discussion. So brief bios. Ami Rokac holds a PhD in psychology from Purdue. He is the executive editor of the journal Psychology, Interdisciplinary and Applied. He's the associate professor and is teaching psychology at the Center for Academic Studies in Israel, and is also a member of the psychology department at York University in Canada and Walden University in the United States. So he's a busy guy. His therapeutic and research interests appropriately include loneliness, anxiety, as well as traumatic experiences and personal growth, which is a really good combination for this talk. And he has also authored a book called Loneliness, Love, and All That's Between. Now, Mimi McFowle. Mimi is a clinical psychologist and was most recently at the Mental Health Innovation Center at the University of Colorado. She has been on the behavioral health system improvement track and has worked at the at mental health technology startups. She recently served as the VP of campus partnerships at Grit Digital Health, and she was there creating mental health fitness center for college students. She has served 10 years as a director of mental health at the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, and she completed her pre and postdoc training at the University of Colorado, Denver. And interestingly enough, she joined the Mental Health Innovation Center because of her frustration with the current mental health care system. And she believes that we can find better ways to help people. So with that, we'll just launch into the talk. So to set the table, we're living in this eerily apocalyptic time. People have elevated anxiety. We're all told to stay home. People are struggling with their personal economics, and this pandemic overhang is potentially compounding an already existing heightened mental health challenge in the state of Colorado. And so, Ami, the media talks about the quote loneliness epidemic, and that's indicative of a massive issue that exists out there. 28% of households are single occupants, and at this time, more people are living alone than ever in human history. So, can you kind of expound on the loneliness epidemic?
Yes, I'm really glad and excited to be part of this presentation, partly because I do it with you guys, and partly because I see my mission as getting loneliness out of the closet. If I may, I want to start with what actually is loneliness. When we talk about loneliness, the public usually thinks about being alone. And yes, you can be lonely when you're alone. However, loneliness, which is even more difficult to bear, is one where we are surrounded by people, like on the subway, in a theater, even by a loving family, and we can still experience loneliness. And I don't say feel loneliness, because loneliness is really an experience which includes feelings and thoughts, etc., etc. The most painful loneliness is the one that we can experience in a relationship, in an intimate relationship, which actually is supposed to be an antidote for loneliness. And if there we feel lonely, we're in trouble. In the literature, we talk about two kinds of loneliness. One is transitional or reactive, which means it comes when the situation around us changes. There is a loss of a loved one. We suddenly are in a different situation that arouses loneliness. It's transitional, it's reactive, and usually it goes away with time. Another one is what I call essential, and stemming from the way the person was brought up since infancy, it becomes intertwined in the person's personality. And I have treated couples where the husband, for instance, comes in and says, I am frustrated. I am so much in love with my wife, and I treat her with so much kindness, and yet she feels lonely. And it's almost like loneliness is part of her personality. And no matter what will happen, she will feel lonely, or she will experience loneliness. So, what is loneliness? Loneliness is something which is very painful. No one wants to feel lonely. And while we talk about loneliness as if we all experience the same thing, actually it's a subjective experience. And while it's always painful, all of us experience it somewhat differently. There are kind of three main approaches to loneliness. One, which I call the psychiatric approach, which says that actually loneliness, and these days it's a little bit more muted, thankfully. It says loneliness is not a regular, normal situation. And if you are suffering from loneliness, especially if it's on a chronic basis, something is really wrong with you. The other one is the social approach, which says that in the past we lived in small villages surrounded by our extended family, and we were together. And now um, everyone is so separated. You don't even need to go to the bank anymore. You go to the machine, or you do it through the computer. If you look at the way apartment buildings, not where which you manage, Lee, but apartment buildings where people live, you have a long, narrow corridor. And it's narrow for the fear that if it were a bit wider, people could congregate and talk a bit. The lobby could be pretty large, and yet most of the time you won't find a chair or a table or a sofa where people could sit and hang together. I want to talk a bit about something really important. I want to talk about the stigma of loneliness. Um, for we have been in the professional literature dealing with loneliness for the past 50 years. However, that was something that the public didn't talk about, and the thinking behind it goes like that. If I'm lonely, that means that I am not good enough to attract other people to want to be with me. If that's the case, I'm a loser, and our society really adores successful people. So there are a multitude of people walking around being really, really lonely, and yet they're worried about sharing it with other people for fear that those people will also run away from them because they don't want to be associated with a loser. Something happened to me in the 1980s. I was teaching, I'm speaking with you now from Toronto, Canada. I was teaching in a community college, and one day the director of continuing education called me and he said, Ami, I know that you're into loneliness. And that was mid 80s, remember. Why don't you offer a workshop? So we published in the calendar next semester, Ami is going to give a 1-day workshop about loneliness. Please come. We had 30 spots, and 2 days beforehand, the director calls me and he says, Ami, you have to cancel. Only 2 people are registered. And I said, okay, probably it's not a good topic. And he said, no, 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 no. It's a very good topic. You just didn't write it in the right way. So I put my thinking cap on, and the next semester we published Dealing with Loneliness, How to Help People Who Are Lonely. It was full. So people would hesitate to say, yeah, I feel lonely and I want to get some help. But when it's talking about other people, oh, we can all do it. I have seen over the years hundreds of people coming for therapy, and out of them, there was only one who came in and said, look, I'm really terribly lonely. The rest of them talked about everything else, but pretty quickly it became clear that they're actually very lonely. But people will not come out and admit it to themselves or to somebody else. I have some more things I want to talk about. Is that okay? Can I continue?
Well, question. So you made an interesting point regarding the talk that you put on where people didn't attend initially when it was about them, but when it was in person about others, all of a sudden they attended. And to me, that gets to sort of this long held stigma that's attached to mental health. And it's one of those weird things where if you break your arm, no one thinks twice about it. But if you say that you are going through some sort of mental health challenge, it's a completely different perspective on it. And it tends to have a stigma and it's negative. Mimi, I'm curious, how has the COVID crisis, how is it impacting people's perception of mental health? I mean, is it catalyzing or accelerating? What's going on there?
Yeah.
Uh-oh, Mimi.
Can I fill in for until Mimi comes back?
Yeah.
All right. There are really 2 waves that loneliness came out of the closet. One was mainly 2 years ago when Theresa May, the Prime Minister in England, appointed a minister for loneliness. Are you back with us?
Yes.
Okay. I'll let you answer.
Did you hear my question?
I did. You know, it's so funny that I mean, it's just apropos about that I'm talking from the tech perspective, and today and my video feed just keeps going in and out from Morrison, Colorado today. So yes, I did hear it. And Ami, did you want to finish your thought, or do you want me to pick up?
Well, I'll say one more sentence. So
Sure.
the first getting out of the closet was 2 years ago, because if there is a minister for loneliness, that means that it's probably something we can talk about. The second wave is now with the COVID, and I'll address it a bit later.
Second wave.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, talking about getting loneliness out of the closet, I think this is, Lee, with your question, it's an opportunity for mental health as a field to kind of catapult even further. That there's no way that we could kind of take the steps with the kind of the relevance of how we're talking about mental health and loneliness to everyone in this collective crisis. Without a period like this. We've been working on stigma, and we didn't even talk about stigma or prevention really in our clinical programs in that late 1990s, and that's really when there was a federal push to kind of talk about more from a public health perspective around kind of how do we reach outside of our discipline and actually make it relevant to them instead of kind of being kind of passive clinicians or providers that didn't think that kind of education or kind of messaging or language piece was important or part of what our responsibility was, and that all shifted. And at that same time, we saw kind of suicide prevention and also stigma reduction campaigns and efforts. Really, we threw a number of different tactics at it over the last decade or 15 years or so, and I've seen the biggest shift, anecdotally in kind of our stigma reduction efforts. Still there, but really kind of broadening what we mean by kind of mental health, and really, I think it's easy to think of kind of mental health as a specialty sector or to separate it from yourself and think of as an other, and the more that we can make it relevant and people see themselves in it, and that's with the language that Ami's talking about. It's how we disrupt the kind of images and kind of heuristics people have around what therapy and support really means, and what it means around kind of who you are as a person, and how that kind of relates to and does not weaken your kind of sense of self, but sometimes even a situational kind of dip. We all face inevitably throughout our lives that equivalent of a scratch on the leg or a broken leg, and some just have more chronic conditions, just like we say in physical health. But I really think this is it's so horrible to say unprecedented because everyone's saying that, but it really about this outbreak, but and the repercussions are kind of tentacles from it. But I really do believe it is thrust and accelerated mental health in the most positive way, and an immediate way, where we could show our value without kind of asking for attention or trying to kind of get people to understand mental health with our statistics and the need. The collective kind of an emergent need for support through this period of isolation was extensive, and it just called for there wasn't time to think about kind of politics or regulations that would get in the way. We had to open the doors to those kind of whether it was technologies or regulatory barriers, because people needed it. The demand was there, and there was no fear in kind of saying that you needed support or help in this crisis. That and just how the media is talking about it, very, very different. And so we know it'll continue, but it's an opportunity for our field for sure.
Lee?
Go for it.
I presume that you will later on ask us about, okay, so what can we do about it? Everybody does. So in preparation for that, I want to talk a little bit about solitude. Can you ask me about solitude? What is solitude?
Well, I will.
All right.
Real quick, sorry, the tech guy is going to jump in for just a second. Lee, can you hover over my video for a second? And then on the left-hand side of it, is there a button to make me an administrator?
Yeah, it says grant administrator status.
Please do. Thank you so much. Okay, now you can continue and I'll go away. Thanks.
All right. I mentioned before that loneliness could be when we are alone. However, there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. I mentioned that loneliness is very painful. We don't like it. And most of us, being hedonistic, want to get away from it. Solitude is when we are alone because we chose to be alone, to do what we can do alone, to think, to reflect, to take a walk in the woods, to create, to sculpt, to write. Many significant literary creations were done during solitude. So I will get back to it when we talk about COVID and what to do during this time. Just one more point. Many times people confuse loneliness and depression. And yes, you can be lonely, and after a long time, you may become depressed and helpless, etc., etc. Now, maybe I'll have time to refer to it later. But those two are not the same. How do we know? We know by what it makes us want to do. When we're depressed, all we want is to be left alone. Just leave me alone, and I need time by myself. Loneliness does exactly the opposite. It makes us want to get closer to people. And that's how we know that these two are different. And at times they happen together when loneliness and depression happen together. However, you can be depressed without being lonely.
Interesting. So Mimi, there's a stat that only 1 in 3 people who actually have mental health challenges actually go out and seek health care. And so there's this gap there. And what is going on in the digital mental health landscape that is helping close that gap? I've heard you talk about sort of a torrent of money and capital being invested in this, and people developing tech and different products where they're trying to be more effective at treating it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, just this is another example of something coming out of the closet. And so this tech and mental health was an emerging field kind of buzzing around in the background, whether people were fully aware of that. Clearly, people had some awareness of kind of how we've used telehealth. That has been a slow burn in terms of kind of our adoption of technology. But it was the most evolved and scaled technology, I would say, that this crisis allowed to scale up pretty quickly, and because of the necessity of it, and that the telehealth and kind of tech-enabled ways of doing support or care all of a sudden became the function of that. I think allowed people to see how technology could fill a gap when there wasn't a choice, and immediately within days we've seen we saw lifting of regulatory barriers and other kind of things that had been just holding kind of the reins on kind of telehealth going wild for the masses, as it could be, immediately change that opportunity. And that has never happened before. And to your original question around kind of people seeking care, I also, I'm reading, kind of reports every day about the people actually reaching out and seeking mental health supports through either telehealth or kind of other tech-enabled apps, whether it's for a clinical reason or just kind of for a listener or a peer support. In record numbers. And so, I think it speaks to the kind of people, it feels legitimized and okay because everyone's in this, and everyone, we keep hearing, everyone's impacted. And so it somehow seems to be triggering people's kind of willingness to kind of reach out and seek care. I hope that continues. It'll be around different issues, and I'm I'm curious to hear about what Ami has to say about kind of the current period and its impact on loneliness in particular. But but in terms of how technology, came out of the closet, so to speak, and really also people can see that there is a tech and mental health field that we never thought we would be involved in. I never thought I'd call myself a technologist and really have a pretty kind of cynical or cautious approach to technology or how we're talking about it. I think it goes sometimes against our kind of fundamental as psychologists or kind of clinical mental health people. We have this fundamental kind of obviously reverence and for kind of human connection because that's the part of our jobs that's at the core of our jobs. So our egos get in the way, but that's still there. It's about technology filling the gaps and not replacing us with unnecessary technology. It really has to be seamless. So despite my focus in technology, it's really about building the solutions that fit the problem and us being involved in what those needs are, especially with the unique kind of healthcare and mental health care system that we have in this country. So it's a very different game for tech companies that have always been really, really great at developing consumer products without the need of content experts or validation efforts and evidence, let alone regulatory changes and how to pay for it and what the financial incentives are. And we are very, very necessary in those conversations for them not only to build the solutions that are actually going to stick and stay that people need, that will fill the holes that we've been talking about with the same stats throughout my whole career. So we'll see. It's an opportunity.
Yes. Go ahead, Ami.
As I'm listening to what we're talking about, I'm asking myself, actually, we didn't talk about why are we talking about loneliness? What's wrong with that?
Tell us why.
I want to shed some light on it. Thank you for asking. Loneliness is really bad news. It is compared to smoking or even diabetes as far as its effect on our health.
And Ami, that's how it got noticed and legitimized. I just want to point out, it's fine that that's a medical and health issue. We'll take it. Whatever gets people's attention to legitimize it. But you're absolutely right. That shifted the attention to it. And go ahead.
It affects us physically. It affects us emotionally. Mm-hmm. It affects us spiritually. And a long period of loneliness doesn't add to our life. It is even related to dementia in older people. I don't know if it can bring on dementia, but it can worsen it. And it is also associated with death. It can hasten our death. So when we look at this, we ask ourselves, how do lonely people feel? And there was research, including mine, that talked with people and said, are you lonely? Yes. Well, tell us how you feel. And they talked about really no fun experience. They talked about feeling inferior and worthless and unattractive because nobody wants to communicate with them, and unlovable. That's one of the more painful part of loneliness. They felt socially incompetent. I don't know how to connect with people, and that's why they don't want to be with me. Something interesting, when we interact with people, we usually take some social risks. The risk that the other person may not be interested, the risk that he will respond in an aggressive manner or an unhospitable manner. And those of us who are not lonely and don't tend towards that will take the risk. People who are lonely are usually those who start from not being able to take the risk, and their loneliness enhances that. And they say to themselves, well, I'm okay the way I am. I don't want to go out and try and again get rejected. What I noticed with the elderly is that as they continue to feel or to experience loneliness, they become demanding. They become angry, and they are starting to demand, why aren't my kids relating more to me?
Oh, that's interesting.
Why is life forgetting me? And they become critical, not being aware that those very characteristics and behaviors are what are driving people away from them.
Yeah, Ami, I have just a question. I didn't expect to think about this, but as I've been listening to you, um, this is particular to this kind of the loneliness or period of isolation, however people are responding to that during the COVID epidemic. But in particular, I'm just wondering about this period seems to have tested or gotten in touch. People have gotten in touch with existential themes related to kind of their lack of freedom. The things that kind of I believe that make up kind of the core kind of spiritual and basic building blocks of our quality of life. But, all of a sudden, how we made meaning out of things was completely different. How we, our freedoms were limited or confusing. And all of a sudden we were talking about a potential medical threat or health threat that could lead to death, which is another kind of so heavy themes. And I'm wondering about how you've thought about loneliness just in the context of this temporary but very, very different collective experience, and from how you've kind of talked about it your whole career, or just what your thoughts are on that.
Well, you started talking about the COVID, and I can go on. I mean, I think that it's really a blessing what happens now, and I think
I
that
agree.
many people forget about it. I also hear people are saying I'm lonely, and there are several points about it. First of all, I believe, I didn't research it, but I believe that people who had difficulties with loneliness in the past are more prone to feel lonely now. Secondly, I think that whereas in the past there was a stigma about loneliness because it meant something must be wrong with me if I'm lonely. Now it's allowed. It's okay to say I'm lonely because it's that little son of a gun virus that caused it. It's all my fault.
Yep.
And the third thing is that I am not sure that when all of those people talk about loneliness, that's what they mean. I mean, I think that they talk about boredom, they talk about anxiety, they talk about not being able to control something which comes from the outside, the virus. And all of that is packaged into loneliness, which now it's okay to talk about. So when we talk about how can we relate to this period, I'll talk a bit more about solitude and about how really good, aside from those people who are very ill and those people who die, this period could be a period of growth for humanity, or at least for us in the Western world.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, the collective pause and the impact of that, and I do believe it's despite, I don't want to invalidate kind of what's happening on the front lines and the seriousness of kind of those
Absolutely,
those issues, and but I do see it as an opportunity to rebuild kinds of where there were kind of large, what I felt like were kind of large spiritual crevasses and kind of pervasive themes around kind of the busyness epidemic and things that really felt like out of control, that it was very pervasive, and there was no way to stop that train. Unfortunately, this was the train that stopped it. I think your point, and Lee, I'm going to give you credit for this. When we talked yesterday, because we were talking about back to your stigma question and kind of the permission to feel lonely or anxious or whatever it is, that in a very different way, because it's collective and it feels relevant to people, and there's some kind of removal or distancing of the personal responsibility of this. Like people can make sense of how this would impact people. People get it, and it's okay to say how you're reacting to it within that. And yet, even right before this, there was still the remaining stigma was around still a kind of a belief that there was some sense of personal responsibility related to mental health or behavioral health issues or addiction issues that overshadowed kind of what the real need was. And this just, kind of busted all of that up for people in a way that I haven't seen.
Mimi, in light of what you're saying, I want to share a little secret with you, just the three of us, okay?
Ooh.
I don't know. I don't know what's happening in Colorado, but here in Toronto, I heard on the news that they're starting to talk about getting life back to normal gradually. Mm-hmm. And I felt a bit anxious hearing
Me
it.
too.
I mean, wow, makes me feel a bit more normal. Where else can you see the world stopping for a while? And the air is clear. And what's interesting for me as a psychologist who deals with human relations and loneliness is that suddenly people start to realize how important relationships with other people are, regardless.
Immediate reprioritization of kind of what matters, right?
Right. And I'm not an optimist. I don't think it's going to last much longer after we start the red race.
You're not an optimist? That surprises me.
about that. But I think that now, hopefully, we can take some lessons from this situation. And again, without minimizing what's happening in hospitals and with sick people, I think it's an amazing period which we have never experienced before in our lifetime, and I don't think we'll ever experience again. The world stopped.
Yeah, the great forced pause. I'm sure someone has already said that, but
people are kind to each other. People and organizations are putting on websites shows and concerts and lessons and lectures for free. I mean, there is a feeling of togetherness. It's almost like you need to bring an enemy, the little virus, for us to feel humanity and connected. Right.
Yeah, and the same enemy. We're all fighting.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that too. And the funny thing is about tech, the tech industry in general. I mean, giving out free access to early stage products, or all along the way, that never happens. And so, or rarely, unless it's associated with kind of a validation study or something like that. But it all of a sudden it forced the developers of these things to see, to first of all say we built this for a reason and we hope it helps, so might as well just get it out there, and we'll deal with kind of how this impacts our bottom line later. But it just upended kind of we're seeing that in every industry, right? I think that's what's amazing. Everyone putting back their kind of we just tightened, the rollback like at Walmart. I just think like, ooh, roll back, and now we're going to unravel that again, one kind of phase at a time, which makes us a little anxious because we don't know what that looks like or the implications. But that is the signal that we can think about how not to just go back to what was automatic before. And yes, we want some routine, and we want to feel connected and be kind of liberated in terms of our physical abilities to gather and things. But it is this time when we've kind of hit where hopefully the deepest bottom, and we're just going to come out. And it'll take a while, and there'll be some rolling hills in there, but this is the good time to think about, okay, we are going to come out of this now. Let's think about how we can do that for a better us.
So I want to take this briefly. I want to take this into the realm of seniors. And Ama, you've mentioned a really interesting distinction that I just hadn't thought of before you mentioned it. It's specifically that there's a distinction between physical connectedness that we're used to getting and emotional connectedness.
Right.
And both are important, but one is much more necessary or essential to, maintaining mental health. Tell me about that.
Well, I'll start by telling you that I have a neighbor who is living alone. She's a widow. She's 75 years old, and I haven't seen her outside for the last month and a half. She refuses to come close to the front door. So in the past, and that's part of the beauty of this period, I would go around the neighborhood and I would visit my neighbors. Visit meaning knocking on the doors, asking how they are, and asking if they need anything. And one day I came to visit her, and we were talking with a glass door between us, and she kind of shot back about 100 yards. And later on, I said to her, "It seems like you're not comfortable talking, even through the glass. So I will not come by." So there is a part of the community which are very, very afraid. And part of that fear comes from A, not understanding really what's going on, and two, feeling that they cannot control what's happening. We humans like to control our lives. And when we're in a situation where we feel we can't control it, we're in trouble. So when people ask me as a psychologist, what can I do to feel better, to really come through that period, not only unscathed, but to go through some growth. And the first thing that I talk about is learned helplessness, which was a concept developed by Seligman, an American psychologist. And there is a story about an Indian in India who got a little elephant, and he was raising him. And to make sure that while he went to the field, the elephant doesn't run away, he would tie him to a pole. And the elephant didn't like it, and he tried to get free, and he couldn't. And after a while of trying and trying and trying, he understood that that's where learned helplessness. He understood that no matter what he'll do, he's just tied. And he continued to stand there as he grew bigger and bigger and bigger, to a point where he would make a little move and the pole would fly away. But he didn't move. He learned that there is nothing he can do in that given situation. I find that many people who don't know how to deal with this situation now are thrown into learned helplessness, which most of the time is what they learned in their childhood. That if there is a situation which A, you don't understand, and B, you feel that you cannot control, you just freeze and you're in fear. And that also reminds me of two mice who fell into a bucket of cream. I like that story because that's part of the way I live my life. And one mouse looks at the other one and says, "You know that mice cannot swim." And he just drowned. The other one wouldn't give up. He hit and he hit and he hit and he hit until he turned the cream into butter, and then he just came out. So when you're talking about a situation that is unclear, that you feel that you cannot control, just accepting it is not something that I do, and not something that I recommend that people do. And I actually, and I hope that I'm right, I actually think that the world is making out of this virus something way too big. And I think that we're trying to kill a little fly with a huge hammer. So the first step into dealing with the situation is letting ourselves admit that we're frightened, and attempting to get out of that I can't do anything about changing it. Some things that I see in this period, which are really beautiful, which I would like to highlight, is aside from the fresh air, aside from kindness of people. I mean, I walk in Toronto streets and nobody will ever say hello. And now there are few of us who walk out and everybody says hello. And sometimes we stand and we talk. We can use technology, which Mimi knows much better than me, to connect with people. And there is that phrase, social connection or social disconnection, which I don't like. It's really physical disconnection.
Hmm.
You can be connected emotionally, intimately with other people. Now with Zoom, hundreds of them. And I think that now that we cannot talk about the new car that we bought or the better house that our neighbors have, now we start to talk man to man and woman to man. Real stuff, things that are close to our heart. And actually, I think that this period could enhance the intimacy and emotional closeness between people.
I agree. And I see Lee, that there's a question which just made me think of one too. Interestingly, I hadn't thought about asking you a question with your expertise in the senior kind of residential and care settings. So I see this question around, what are some of the solutions that Renew is doing to help with loneliness? And tell me if I'm totally getting off track here, but I actually haven't asked you in all the conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks, just what you're seeing in the as you keep a pulse of kind of what's going on in this sector. And at whatever level, but also like really practically, how have, if there have been, have visits been, suspended, or how are you using telehealth for if there are medical needs? And then, I can talk later about just some of the kind of other fun kind of tech enabled, especially through VR for seniors that are just that some settings are using. But I'm curious about what you guys are doing.
No, that's happily expound on that. Safety is the foremost concern right now. Safety being really on the physical side of safety. So there's distance and social isolation. It's incredibly important, especially for people with, a predisposition to, if they get transmission, that they can slide down a slope. So that's actually why I asked Ami that question, the distinction between physical connectedness and emotional connectedness. So the good news is that physical connection is in certain ways less important than emotional connection. And you can basically feed people emotional connection through the telephone, through FaceTime, and through kind of creating that via technology, thankfully, that we live in this time of day. And, we can purchase devices, put them in people's rooms, and link them and basically create this social network within the building. And also, in addition to that, you can also get outside the building and connect people with their families. So it's actually been an area of research that we've been just rapidly, pivoting to, because we're the way we approach senior housing is by designing an amazing offering, and part of that is by designing unique and novel experiences. Well, now that it's changed and we've got a pandemic, we approach that. How can we leverage digital tech to create that same effect? And I think with Ami, Ami's actually been a part of the research, which is a good thing, because we can provide social connection. So the other interesting thing is, and this is really about like product development and the way that technology, product developers and technology think about things. They design around the consumer, right? And they really listen intently for what's kind of okay, what's really cool, and what's just, not cool at all. And through that, they design sort of a value proposition that's a really good fit. And when they establish that fit, the thing that they're making resonates. What we found is, for someone who is, say, around 85, it's really hard for them to utilize technology. things that that we may have grown up with are things that they didn't get. They didn't get that through childhood or through the last few decades. So it's really interesting to kind of design technology or sort of a network that caters to that demographic. And one thing we found is like Amazon Alexa allows a drop-in function, which means that an adult son or daughter from home can press a button on their phone and instantly appear on mom or grandma's screen in her room. And as long as they schedule a phone call for 2 p.m. tomorrow, mom in her room, in her suite is all there, and just you appear, and all of a sudden you're in dialogue and the grandchildren are there. And so
and that was not available before, you didn't know about it or utilize it before this, are you saying, or it was used more during this time?
Well, I mean, the initial go-to is like FaceTime and using like iPads and those sorts of devices. But even we found that even that has some challenges. Oftentimes you can, give someone who's 85 an iPad and they run into tech glitches and, what do I do? And it's really inconsistent. And so trying to take even that minimal level of complexity out of the interaction is a big deal. And so
just for you to know, even younger people will have problems.
Right. So, and I've been,
and that's just, you just demonstrated Lee doing kind of real world, agile iteration. And that's what, that's how we build better product. I think
we can hear you. We can hear you.
Frozen. Oh.
All right, we got about 10% of that
Let me know.
message. Oh, there you go. You're back, me, I think. All right, coming back.
Here she is.
All right. Audio. Okay.
Did you guys freeze up, or was it just me?
No, you did.
Oh, there it goes again.
That's all right. We can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay.
So, just to kind of punctuate what we can do is, I think you were talking about this agile approach to developing.
Well, I was just saying, you're demonstrating like that's how products that is exactly how products for our sector are going to evolve, and it's simple engagement and kind of iterations that you talked about that make all the difference.
I totally agree. So, we'll evolve that as we kind of as the pandemic continues to specifically impact that audience.
Okay, for the record, I literally have never had my video go out so many times in one time. It's just because I'm talking about technology. It's totally, I get it, universe. But I keep losing my connection here in Morrison, so I apologize. But it's the universe playing a joke on me right now. So apologize, Lee. Continue.
No, that's all right. So, you've got these communication capabilities with family and then within the residents, and you can actually pull ideas from what is being developed for millennials and what, younger demographics are doing with Zoom wine parties and, these live concerts. I think, Ami, you had mentioned that you can eventually bring like live lectures like this. You can bring live workshops and classes where if someone wanted to learn how to draw from like a legitimate artist or instructor, we can now, collaborate with an artist in the around the building and provide sort of a whole curriculum of live lectures and talks and workshops.
We can go outside, and if we're not standing beside someone else, there's no problem. We can visit other people.
Yes.
And I see that in my neighborhood, and that is so cute. People are taking two chairs, sitting outside 2 meters apart, and they have a good time. There's a lot when I ask people, you are complaining about this period, and I'm talking about people who can come and go and maybe even drive. And I say, what are you missing? Well, I'm missing going shopping. But then there are some people who do the shopping for them. And today it's wonderful. You don't need to go to the doctor and spend half a day waiting there. You call the office, and within an hour, the physician calls you back, and bingo, things are done. So I really don't see that period, and hopefully I can get that message across. It is a different period of time. Different doesn't mean bad. I think it's good.
Awesome. So, all right. So we're gonna flip to answering some audience Q&A. So we're gonna make this interactive, and so I will go ahead and just pose the first question. The first one is just a quick answer. Someone was asking about the technology that you can use with a loved one that enables a drop-in, or a drop-in is all it's required to communicate. It's the Amazon Echo, and it's I know the Show 8, which has a larger video screen, and it's extremely user friendly, extremely. So that's a pretty cool device for that kind of communication. So let's see here. Another question.
And Lee, I could mention just also wanted at any point, if people are interested in learning more about kind of how people are using VR in senior settings. There's a few offerings out there right now that we can put in the show notes or whatever.
I think you should just go ahead and describe that.
Well, I won't.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, it keeps so just to let you know, every like 30 seconds or less, it kicks me all the way out, both audio and video, and then I have to refresh.
That's good. We like rhythm.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna keep the video off for now and just see if that helps.
Right, it would be better.
So with VR applications that are being used in kind of similar senior housing and care facilities are really around the immersive experience or that VR allows by putting on a headset that are relatively cheap, and it's easier to get content. Basically, the concept is around kind of reminiscence kind of therapy, so to speak. So transporting yourself through VR to somewhere where you would not be able to go. There's been a number of studies around VR and other kind of either assessment or motor rehabilitation or cognitive rehabilitation use cases, and mental health for other kind of phobias and PTSD. But for the purposes of the kind of this webinar and talking about loneliness, we're really seeing VR as a vehicle to transport someone to, say, somewhere on their bucket list, or somewhere they went routinely on a family vacation. And it's that simple. But if you haven't tried VR, all I can say is that it's very different than a 2D experience, and it evokes cognitive states that we believe, because we believe what we see in an immersive world. And so even though you're not there,
it basically tricks the brain, or really is a compelling, convincing landscape.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, there are other ways. There's one company, I'll send it, that's doing a virtual. I'm actually following up with them to see how it's been going. A virtual support group in VR with seniors in assisted living facilities. And so, because I always think, that just takes the interaction with the device one step further in terms of connection, because there's a way to also obviously connect in VR as if you're in the same room. So it just takes, the Zoom platform, for example, and makes it feel like you are literally in the same room. So it just adds a little bit of dimensionality.
Oh, that's interesting.
To it. So
you could literally, kind of have maybe like a cocktail party with friends, but be in a virtual environment.
Oh yeah.
So that would be
yes, and yeah. Social VR is a exploding space, but as we see it, the need for kind of group support and just connecting isolated individuals that are in the same situation, it's been very useful.
What are some of the specific like bucket list items that you've seen that you mentioned there's a company that actually is offering this sort of experience to seniors, the VR experience. By the way, it's something that we'd love to pilot. So if you can connect us or
yes, I guess that that's a good chance to say. So I've looked at the content too of the VR companies that are providing kind of this kind of reminiscent kind of they don't call it therapy, but experiences for seniors. Sure. And just to clarify, the Tech Innovation Network at the National Mental Health Innovation Center where I work, the concept is to really get different community sites. They don't have to be mental health oriented or specific or clinical, but sites like Renew who are interested in kind of dipping their toe into familiarizing themselves with VR, for example. Our program facilitates there's nothing to buy. We give you the headsets, and that it functions to meet that need. Is just so that's an opportunity. I'll follow up with you, and we give you the content, so you don't even have to actually go to one of the companies at this point until you figure out kind of is this using mindfulness content, is that valuable? Like what kinds of content do you need to have access to that will really take using this technology to the next level within your organization. So it can be very, very simple start, and we show you everything about, even if you've never put on a headset, which I hadn't either until 5 years ago. It's very simple in contact with you, and you can kind of take it where you want. You can take it into research applications, but the point is to get real world testing of familiarity and see what works or if it doesn't. And really get your feedback around, I don't know, were they difficult to clean, or did people really love it? And, was there a demand for it? And the novelty of it and the ease of that we make,
Sure.
content available in the platform just kind of is a zero entry pool for people to get into this. So I'm happy to make that happen.
So Ami, I kind of want to hear both of your opinions on this, but with there's an expected lagging economic recovery as a result of pausing the economy. And can we expect there to be also a parallel lagging sort of residual impact around social isolation or just people's anxieties about the concept of losing their job or their business being sort of in jeopardy and those sorts of things? How do you expect that to impact the mental health landscape? Ami, if you'd respond to that first.
Well, you're asking me to look in the crystal ball, and I don't know how well I can do that. There is no question that there's going to be a higher number of people who experience anxiety and depression, especially if they lost their job. And I guess, like with everything else, if they take an active role and they become active in looking for a job, they will feel more in control of the situation, and they may have a better chance of finding one. They're not assured of finding one, but they may have a better chance. Those people who will suffer economically from this period are going to be in a tough spot. And in the psychological community, we're already talking about how can we encourage them, how can we help them not lose the belief that they can get out of the situation. But it's not going to be an easy period. The easy period, I think, is now. It's going to be difficult.
Tell me your question.
Okay, so it was just a question about the economy is going to be.
You broke up there at the last part. I heard that. Yeah, the economy, piecing things back together.
Residual mental health impact. What do you?
Yeah, got it. Got it. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ami. It's going to be, you know, I think it's, you know, it's hard right now, but it's going to get different hard when we go back, or at least we try to go back to the normal state that we've kind of craved, you know, during this period of isolation. But we've gotten kind of used to that, and then there's a fear of kind of peeling back and the anxiety that's really touching, I mean, all parts of our lives, and you know, our mental health and of our sense of quality of life is tied to all the other domains that are also impacted by this. You know, our ability to work and feel us thrive within them, and so I think, you know, as there are difficulties or delays or uncertainties in you know, in what that future looks like for us individually within this whole thing, I think that's going to be it's going to be difficult. I mean, I think the first kind of wave of this was, you know, if you think about kind of an acute crisis need, that's where it was. People were very afraid, you know, didn't have any information. Things were kind of falling out of their norm day by day. As we go back into this, it's a slower kind of burn in terms of the uncertainty and our power within that. But I think, as Ami mentioned this before, related to loneliness, that and this is true for you know, not just mental health and health, but everything that you know, this period of crisis just exacerbated or either may have brought to the forefront, you know, things that were already there before, and so similarly, you know, with people with kind of pre-existing kind of either conditions or you know, propensities, I think it'll be difficult. I do see, you know, an opportunity in all of this, though. At the same time, I just think better individual and personal awareness, and also under kind of a spiritual awareness to others is something that we can't quantify.
Lee, if I may, you asked me and I responded about people who will have economical fallout from all that. And those are part of the people. But the other part, I believe, will come out enriched by this period. We'll look back and we'll say, wow, maybe we can contribute to bring the world closer to the way it was when it stopped moving. The second thing, I look back and I say to myself, wow, it seems like I had the emotional resources to cope with a very different and, to some people, difficult situation. So I'm going to get in touch with myself, knowing that I can handle even difficult situations.
That's great.
And the thing that I'm most hopeful, but I don't know if it's going to happen, is that we will realize that what's really important is social connection. And that's why I don't like the word social isolation, but I call it physical isolation. If we could keep the level of connection that we have, or will learn to create now for the period afterwards, then we won, or at least we grew in some respect.
So
I think that I want to. Can I add one more point to that? Lee, the same thing when you asked about kind of mental health impacts of this, it's another example of a double-sided coin. There are we going to see kind of do we usually see economic kind of downturns and all that comes with that tied to increase in suicide rates? Yes, we have. Historically, we may see that again in certain populations throughout this. And the conflicting part of that is, as Ami demonstrated, this has brought us together in a way that only kind of national and collective crises can, just as similar to kind of 9/11, for example, and one kind of conflicting and often unknown kind of factor around suicide prevention or the numbers of suicides is that, in times of national of crisis, in particular, when you think suicide rates would go up, they actually right around those go down. And so there is, there's opportunities for resilience. It absolutely, people will be impacted, but we've seen both ways, so it's not all dire. Right.
I want to close out with a question, and this is definitely on a high note. Ami, when we were sort of just chit-chatting about this interview session and talking about your background and expertise, you had mentioned something that really flipped the script for me, and it was sort of to the effect of, every crisis is also an opportunity, right? And it's just about the reframing. And then you rattled off a number of things that you were experiencing yourself as you go outdoors. There's sort of this enhanced appreciation for certain things.
Yes.
I thought that was enlightening. Run through sort of what you're experiencing out there right now.
Well, we all talk about this period as being difficult and a crisis. And it is difficult in some respects, but I look at it as different rather than difficult. And I find that I go outside and I'm like a little kid who looks at the world and seeing all the changes. And they're just interesting. I mean, I talked before about the social connections in the neighborhood. I talked about the clear air. It's even interesting to see people waiting in line patiently outside of supermarkets. And then they go in and they try to behave in a way that not only will protect them, but will not frighten other people. I can see now how I can, even though I knew it, but I haven't experienced it that frequently, but I can see now how I can connect with other people through technology, through writing emails, through making phone calls, through writing letters. Letters are coming back. The world is definitely a different place now. And I don't think it's necessarily bad. I also think it will affect, for instance, in university, we're going to start and teach more and more online. And in some large courses, it's okay. In small seminars, it may be difficult and we may go back to a regular classroom. So all in all, I discover a lot of new things about myself and about the world. And I think you mentioned the word reframing before. I really think that it all has to do not with the given situation, but the way we look at it. And if we can look at the situation as different rather than difficult, as one where we do have a lot of control over how we're going to go through it, as not insisting that if I'm preventing from interacting with people, standing very close to them or touching them, that I can connect with them in other ways, I think we're going to come out of this and we'll be pretty okay.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. And thanks for enlightening me on that point. So just to conclude here, I just want to thank you, Mimi McFall, and you, Ami Rokach, for the enlightening conversation. Appreciate that. And then I want to thank the audience for joining us in this digital talk. We are arranging the next talk as we speak. And so you can pay attention to that. We will be posting it on our website at www.renewsenior.com, and also pay attention to the Aspen Times for details on the next topic and set of speakers. Lastly, Renew is always open to collaboration, so do not hesitate to contact the community. You can find out how to reach us. The phone number is on our website, and you can ask for me. My name is Lee Touchfarber, and so just do not hesitate on that front. And with that, I appreciate and thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
It was a pleasure.